I see this as contributing back to the community in a way by de-risking the adoption of new ideas.
I'm Winston. I'm a product manager here at Honeycomb. And today I have the pleasure of talking to Hazel Weekly, who has been a web developer, an SRE, as an expert in observability, and currently works as a principal architect. Thanks so much for joining me today, Hazel.
I have a question for you now. When I'm thinking about all of this metadata, when I'm thinking about all of these things that you want to correlate between the back end and the front end, there's the trace propagation headers in the OpenTelemetry standard, which allow you to connect traces together, but they don't give you anything beyond that. So if you want to correlate certain types of advanced metadata, certain types of things that don't fit in a trace or in a span, you currently have to, it almost feels like you have to step out of the bag standard of OpenTelemetry and start using something called baggage, which has a lot of baggage and it's not very comfortable to use and it's kind of different, right? So it's clunky, it's awkward, and it can disincentivize companies from utilizing this very valuable thing that unlocks that value. So how do you see the OpenTelemetry and the observability community addressing the challenges of using baggage and maybe coming up with alternative solutions, better ergonomics? What do you think is going to go on there?
Yeah, it's no doubt a big challenge for end users because, as you accurately put it, the baggage API has a lot of baggage and it's just clunky. I think there will be multiple solutions. I don't think there's going to be any one specific solution that solves everything. One thing that is already kind of helpful is that you can use an OpenTelemetry collector, and so then the front end can pass up metadata, and it can be traces can be augmented at the collector level. So information about backend services could be pulled in there. There's kind of different pathways inside a collector to modify your data and augment it based on information you feel is important. That may be one thing that's helpful. I hope over time the open source community can continue to evolve the APIs and the SDKs so that the ergonomics are less clunky and more secure. One problem can be sometimes that using baggage, it will attach that to all requests, whether they're secured or not. So it can be a way that people leak data accidentally. That's kind of a language specific thing. So hopefully we can curb those. At Honeycomb, one thing that we're really interested in, and we recently rolled out, is relational fields, which actually is a different way of approaching the same problem. So front-end spans are going to be emitted from your client. You, as we've talked about in other videos, you want to keep that payload small. You want to respect users' data. You don't necessarily want to attach a ton of metadata and pass it over the wire. And so the way that we've addressed this problem is we've enabled the ability to query and search across distributed traces. In Honeycomb, it's called relational fields. And it's basically the ability to say, like, if my parent span emitted from a client and I know it has these attributes that I want to query on, but then also I need to know, let's say service, B in the back end had an error. So I need to be able to query in the front end these attributes, but then in the back end know when a service returned an error. I can kind of search across the full distributed trace and find the information without needing to pass information back and forth over the wire and really try to delve into the internals of OpenTelemetry and deal with baggage. And I really think that is a promising way to handle this moving forward, is instead of it requiring developers to capture all the metadata they want, make sure it's passed through the entire chain, deal with these kind of clunky environments and network requests and all of that. Instead, let each service capture all the metadata on its own, and then enable at the product level, at the kind of point where you stitch up all the traces into a searchable, queryable thing. That's where you start trying to collect the metadata and correlate it. We're hopeful that solves the problem. makes it easier for people, but also we'll be watching OpenTelemetry and definitely contributing as well as we see promising work in the future.
And I really, really like that approach that Honeycomb has taken with this because it's so reminiscent to me of how browsers have innovated over the years with taking new features in CSS or JavaScript or just the browser itself and saying, hey, we see this need. But before we do all this work to make it a specification, to make it a standard and like stamp it out in permanent perpetuity, let's make sure that she really works. And I see this as contributing back to the community in a way by de-risking the adoption of new ideas. You develop it, you talk about it, and you release it, and eventually that can become part of the standard. And it reminds me actually of another thing that you've done this with, which is your data store. Charity used to talk a lot about how deeply unique the data store of Honeycomb is and the columnar aspect of it, and how that unlocked a lot of the wide events, the tracing, the searching, and the product functionality that you needed. And now you see a lot of other vendors and a lot of other sources. Columnar databases have exploded in the last 5 years. And the data revolution that is currently happening right now and the decoupling of everything in data is going to unlock even more things. And the open source ecosystem is going to push things in weird and innovative directions. And I can't wait to see that happen to the open telemetry specification, to other various aspects of it. There are so many other difficult questions, so many other things about how do we tie together all these bits of in-band and out-of-band data, wrap it all together, and it's such a wide solution space that the only way to make real progress here, I think, is for companies to try a risk, adopt it, figure out what works, and then talk about it. And to see you really doing that and leaning into that is, to me, a lot of what that healthy open source collaboration between the company and the community is about.
I could not agree more. And I am so excited to see what you write and have to say about anything that emerges. I really appreciate your thoughts and expertise in observability and about OpenTelemetry and everything that I've read from you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a joy to talk with you, and I can't wait until we get to talk again.
Thank you, Winston.